In 1960, Brazil unveiled a capital city so perfectly planned that it was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site before most cities had finished building their subway systems. Brasilia was supposed to prove that a nation could think its way into modernity, that rational design could replace the messy, unequal sprawl of the old coastal cities. And yet today, Brasilia is routinely cited by urban planners and geographers not as a model to copy, but as a cautionary example of what happens when a city is designed for an idea rather than for the people who actually have to live in it. The contradiction is not subtle. A city that was purpose-built, from scratch, with total control over every block, every sector, every axis, and it still produced a place where ordinary daily life is, for millions of residents, genuinely difficult to navigate without a car. To understand what went wrong, you have to understand what was promised. President Juscelino Kubitschek founded Brasilia on April 21, 1960, relocating Brazil's capital from Rio de Janeiro to the country's central west interior highlands. The motivations were layered. Moving the capital inland was meant to open up Brazil's vast, undeveloped interior, to distribute economic activity away from the congested southeastern coast, and to signal, loudly and unmistakably, that Brazil was a modern nation with a modern future. The architects chosen for the project were among the most celebrated modernists alive. Lúcio Costa developed the urban plan. Oscar Niemeyer designed the iconic government buildings. Joaquim Cardoso handled the structural engineering. Roberto Burle Marx shaped the landscape. This was not a committee of cautious bureaucrats. This was a declaration. The city plan, famously laid out in the shape of an airplane when seen from the air, organized life into distinct color-coded numbered sectors. A hotel sector, a banking sector, an embassy sector. There were residential superblocks, commercial zones, government zones. Everything had its designated place. That logic, the logic of total zoning, is precisely where the promise began to fracture. The design philosophy behind Brasilia was rooted in CIAM, the international modernist movement that believed the city should be separated into pure functional zones. Work here, live there, shop somewhere else entirely. The street, as urban theorists like Jane Jacobs would later argue, is the basic unit of city life. It is where commerce and residents mix, where pedestrians generate the informal economic and social activity that makes a city feel alive. CIAM, and by extension Brasilia's planners, treated the traditional street as a problem to be solved, a source of congestion, chaos, and inefficiency. So they designed it out, not accidentally, deliberately. The superblock structure meant that the distances between any two functional zones were too large to walk comfortably. The monumental scale of the monumental axis, a pair of wide avenues flanking a vast central park, was visually dramatic but humanly empty at ground level. Everything about the geometry rewarded the car and punished the pedestrian. For the small population of federal workers and elite professionals who moved into the Plano Piloto in the early years, the design worked tolerably well. They had cars, they had government salaries. But Brasilia's construction required an enormous workforce, hundreds of thousands of laborers who built the city and then had nowhere to live within it. The Plano Piloto was expensive and limited. These workers settled in what would become satellite cities, urban peripheries at considerable distance from the planned core. The federal district today is divided into 35 administrative regions, and only one of them, the Plano Piloto, is the original planned city. Brasilia proper now has a population of 2.8 million people. The majority of those residents do not live inside the UNESCO-protected modernist plan. They live in the surrounding urban area, commuting in, often over long distances, along road infrastructure designed for cars. The turning point is not a single dramatic event. It is a slow structural reveal. As Brasilia's population grew and the peripheral settlements expanded, the gap between the city's design theory and the lived experience of its working population became impossible to ignore. The sectors that had seemed so rationally organized on a drawing board turned out to be rigid and unresponsive in practice. A resident in the Plano Piloto who needed a pharmacy and a haircut and a meal on the same afternoon faced a journey by car between zones that a traditional city street would have compressed into a 5-minute walk. Informal commercial activity, the kind that spontaneously fills the sidewalks of older Brazilian cities, struggled to establish itself in Brasilia's tightly zoned environment. The city's legal and spatial structure actively resisted the organic, mixed-use density that most urban residents depend on. The mechanism here is worth slowing down to examine because it appears in other planned cities too. When you zone a city by function rather than by neighborhood, you force every daily errand to become a trip. Trips require infrastructure. Infrastructure scales to vehicle traffic. Vehicle traffic generates demand for parking, for wider roads, for grade-separated interchanges. Each of those design responses makes the environment less hospitable to pedestrians, which further entrenches car dependence. It is a self-reinforcing cycle. Brasilia did not become car-dependent because Brazilians wanted cars. It became car-dependent because the spatial structure of the city left no viable alternative for people whose lives did not fit neatly into the original plan. And as the city's real population grew far beyond the elite professional class the design had imagined, the mismatch compounded. The costs are distributed unevenly, as they almost always are in urban planning failures. Residents of the Plano Piloto live inside one of the most celebrated and architecturally significant urban environments in the world. Brasilia's modernist architecture, those white curves and geometric plazas and sweeping government buildings designed by Niemeyer, is genuinely extraordinary. The city's GDP per capita ranks among the highest of any major Latin American city. But the workers who maintain that environment, who staff its restaurants and hospitals and schools and government offices, largely cannot afford to live inside it. They absorb the commuting costs that the design imposes. The satellite cities and peripheral settlements that house them were not designed with the same care or resources as the Plano Piloto. They are the unacknowledged infrastructure of the capital's daily functioning. It is worth being precise about what this episode does and does not mean. Brasilia is not a failed city in any simple sense. It functions as a capital. Its government institutions operate. Its population is large and economically significant. It has an international airport that connects it to major Brazilian cities and beyond. It hosted the 2014 FIFA World Cup and the 2016 Summer Olympics. It is a living, working city of 2.8 million people. What failed was a specific planning ideology applied at enormous scale without sufficient flexibility or humility about the complexity of urban life. The failure belongs to the theory, not to the city or its residents. And that distinction matters because the theory was not unique to Brasilia. Versions of it were applied in housing projects, new towns, and urban renewal schemes across the world in the mid-20th century, with similarly mixed results. Where does Brasilia stand today? The federal district continues to grow. The gap between the protected Plano Piloto and the broader metropolitan reality remains a defining feature of the city's geography. There are ongoing discussions about transit improvements, about how to better connect the peripheral regions to the core, about how to introduce more mixed-use vitality into the rigid sectoral structure without destroying the UNESCO-listed fabric. None of those conversations are simple, partly because the very features that make the city legally protected are the ones that make it hardest to adapt. The lesson Brasilia offers is specific and exportable. A city designed around an abstraction, even a beautiful, well-intentioned abstraction, will eventually be inhabited by reality. The workers arrive. The informal economy tries to take root. The families who cannot afford the original design settle on its edges and absorb the costs its geometry imposes on them. Total zoning, monumental scale, and the elimination of the street as a shared social space do not produce a more rational city. They produce a city whose order is legible from an airplane and whose friction is felt on the ground every day by the people who can least afford it. The workable alternative was never exotic or theoretical. mixed-use neighborhoods, human-scale streets, transit networks designed before car infrastructure rather than after, housing distributed across income levels rather than concentrated in peripheral satellites. These are not revolutionary ideas. They are what cities had figured out, imperfectly but practically, long before anyone tried to plan perfection from scratch. The question Brasilia leaves open is one every city planner still faces. Who exactly is the city being designed for, and what happens when those people and the people who build and sustain the city for them are not the same group? Visual reconstructions are illustrative. Facts and interpretations are based on the sources listed in the description.